Michael Jordan visits grave of a fan who wrote to him as a child. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today, and if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. In a small, quiet town in the Midwest, Sarah Thompson spent her childhood with a deep admiration for Michael Jordan. Her bedroom was adorned with his posters, and every moment spent watching him dominate on the basketball court felt like a personal victory. She wasn't just another fan, she was one of those millions who felt connected to the man whose name was synonymous with greatness. Growing up in a town where basketball wasn't a major focus, Sarah's love for the game was almost a secret. But it was a secret that kept her inspired and hopeful, a reminder of dreams bigger than the limits of her small world. One day, when she was about 10 years old, Sarah sat down at her desk and wrote a letter. It wasn't a letter asking for an autograph or a ticket to a game. It was a letter that came from the heart, a letter that conveyed what Michael Jordan meant to her, how he made her feel like anything was possible, and how his success helped her believe in herself. She poured her thoughts into the paper, telling him how much she admired him, not just for his basketball skills, but for the way he carried himself with such grace, determination, and focus. She wrote about how she watched him play on TV, imagining what it would be like to sit courtside and witness his greatness in person. She didn't expect a response. She simply wanted to send her words out into the world, hoping that somehow they would reach the man who had inspired her. The letter was carefully folded and placed in an envelope. The address on the front was Michael Jordan's known office in Chicago, a place where countless fans sent letters, hoping for a glimpse of their idol's acknowledgement. Sarah never gave it a second thought after it was sent. She was a child, and to her, this was more a symbolic act than an expectation. She didn't need a response to know that her admiration was real. But as time passed, Sarah grew older, and the letter faded into the past. It was a part of her childhood that, like so many things, she moved on from. Years went by, and Sarah's life took its own course. She graduated from high school, went to college, and worked in a small local business. She never lost her love for basketball, but her connection to Michael Jordan remained one of those distant dreams she'd held as a child. By the time she was in her late 20s, Sarah had married and started a family of her own. She still had the occasional daydream of meeting Michael Jordan, but it was just that, a dream. As time wore on, she put away the posters of him in a box, the same way she stored other childhood memories. But deep down, there was always a quiet, comforting sense of pride that Michael Jordan had, in some way, been a part of her life. When Sarah passed away at the age of 43, it wasn't from any dramatic illness or event. She had lived a full life, though one that had been filled with more challenges than many knew. She had always been the person who uplifted others, always finding ways to make people laugh, even when her own life wasn't as easy as it seemed. Her family, devastated by the loss, went through her belongings as part of the grieving process. It was a way of holding onto memories, even if they were small objects and mementos from a life that had been too short. In the attic, tucked away in a box of old letters and photos, they found it, the letter Sarah had written to Michael Jordan when she was just a child. The envelope was yellowed with age, and the handwriting on the outside had faded, but the words inside were still legible. Sarah's love for the basketball legend was so clear, so pure, that it brought tears to their eyes. It was a letter full of hope, admiration, and an innocent belief in the power of heroes. Sarah had never expected anything in return, but now, reading it, her family saw how deeply Michael Jordan had impacted her life. They were moved by the realization that her dream of reaching out to him, even if it had never been answered, had meant something to her. The letter lay there, untouched for a while, in the box alongside other pieces of Sarah's past. But as her family reflected on her life and the importance she had placed on that letter, they realized that there was something worth doing. They decided that the world should know about this simple, yet powerful, act of a young girl reaching out to someone who had given her so much joy, even from afar. They knew they had to find a way to bring Sarah's words to the attention of Michael Jordan, to honor the deep connection she had felt, even if it was never realized during her lifetime. The discovery of Sarah's letter brought with it a sense of closure for the family, but it also sparked something bigger. The idea of honoring her memory and her unfulfilled dream became a mission. They began looking for ways to get the letter to Michael Jordan, to see if perhaps there was a way to acknowledge the girl who had written to him with such admiration so many years ago. They didn't know if he would even remember the letter or if it had ever even crossed his desk, but they felt that Sarah's legacy deserved recognition. The act of reaching out had been so innocent, so full of hope, that it seemed fitting for it to be seen by the man who had unknowingly shaped her childhood. As they searched for a way to connect with Michael Jordan's team, the family shared the story with their friends and the people in their town, most of whom remembered Sarah fondly. They spoke of how, growing up, Sarah had always dreamed of seeing Michael Jordan play live, of meeting him and telling him how much he meant to her. Even in her adulthood, Sarah had spoken occasionally of her letter, not with expectation, but as a part of her youth she carried with her. Months passed, and the letter remained in their hands, its significance growing with every day that it lay there. It wasn't just a piece of paper, it was a bridge between a child's dream and the reality of a life well lived, a life that was now gone. The family knew they couldn't let the letter be forgotten. It had to be shared with Michael Jordan, no matter the outcome. And so, the search began. Would they be able to reach the man who had unknowingly inspired so much of Sarah's life? Would Michael ever read her words and understand the quiet impact he had made? Or would the letter, as Sarah had once believed, simply remain an unspoken connection between her and her idol, a memory that only she could hold on to? The next chapter of this story would unfold not only through the actions of Sarah's family but through Michael Jordan's response to the words of a young fan who had written him a letter with no expectation other than the hope that somehow, somewhere, it would reach him. The search to connect with Michael Jordan had begun. Sarah's family wasn't sure where to start, but they knew they had to try. They couldn't let the letter, so full of innocence and admiration, be forgotten. It wasn't just about honoring Sarah's memory, it was about reaching out to the man who had, in some small but profound way, shaped the course of her life. The task of tracking down Michael Jordan was daunting. He was a global icon, one of the most famous athletes in the world. His name was synonymous with excellence, not just in basketball, but in business, branding, and culture. Sarah had written her letter years ago, during a time when Michael was still playing, when the Chicago Bulls dominated the NBA and his legacy was being built in real time. But now, he had retired, and his life had taken a different direction. They started by contacting the usual channels, Michael Jordan's office, his publicist, and his charity foundation. They sent emails, made calls, and even tried reaching out through his social media accounts. They had no idea whether their request would even get noticed, but they felt it was worth trying. The letter had touched their hearts, and they knew it had to be shared. It wasn't just about Sarah's love for Michael Jordan, it was about the way his influence had shaped an entire generation of fans. There was a power in that connection, a power that transcended time and distance, and they wanted Michael to know how much he had meant to Sarah. Meanwhile, Michael was going through his own life journey. While his basketball career had defined the earlier part of his life, Michael had shifted his focus to family, business, and philanthropy in the years since his retirement. He had built an empire around his name, using his brand to endorse products, lead charitable initiatives, and make a lasting impact on the world. But despite all of the accolades and the wealth that came with his success, he had always remained grounded in the core values he had learned growing up. His family, his work ethic, and his drive to make a difference were what kept him grounded. But there were moments, quiet moments, when Michael would reflect on the impact he had made on his fans. He had spent decades in the spotlight, carrying the weight of expectations from fans, teammates, and coaches. He had given everything to the game, and in return, the world had given him adoration and praise. But in those quiet moments, he thought of the people who had supported him along the way. He thought of the fans who sent him letters, the children who wore his jerseys and hoped to one day be like him. He thought of the lives he had touched, not just through his athletic achievements, but through his efforts to be a role model, to show the world that anything was possible with hard work, perseverance, and a little bit of belief. And so, when he received the letter from Sarah's family, it was one of those moments when he stopped and took notice. At first, Michael's team thought the letter was just another fan letter, one of the thousands he had received over the years. But as they read the words of a young girl who had written to him as a child, they were struck by the sincerity and depth of her admiration. Her letter wasn't about asking for something, it was simply a heartfelt expression of gratitude. Sarah had never expected a response, but the letter had been a small piece of her heart, sent into the world in the hopes that Michael Jordan might read it and understand how much he meant to her. For Michael, reading the letter was a moment of reflection. It took him back to his own childhood, when he had looked up to athletes and role models, when he had dreamed of making his mark on the world. He understood, perhaps more deeply than anyone, how much those early influences could shape a person's life. Michael's decision to respond wasn't driven by the desire for more publicity or the need to add another story to his already overflowing legacy. It was driven by a simple, deep understanding of the connection between a fan and an athlete, a connection that could last a lifetime, even without ever meeting face to face. The letter from Sarah was a reminder that, for all his fame and success, he was still just a man who had the ability to touch lives in ways that most people couldn't even imagine. And it was that realization that led Michael to make a decision: he would honor Sarah's memory in the most meaningful way he could. He would visit her grave. It wasn't a decision that Michael took lightly. He knew that his every move was watched, his every action scrutinized. But this wasn't about the spotlight or making a public spectacle of himself. This was about honoring the bond between him and a young fan who had passed away far too soon. It was about showing that, even in death, the connection between them had meaning. Sarah had written to him as a child, but the words she had shared were timeless. They transcended the boundaries of age and fame, and Michael felt compelled to make that connection real, even if it was in a way that no one could have expected. The journey to the small-town cemetery was not a grand affair. Michael didn't arrive with an entourage or a camera crew in tow. There were no press conferences, no fanfare, just Michael, quietly honoring the memory of a fan who had never asked for anything but a simple acknowledgement. As he stood in front of Sarah's grave, the weight of the moment settled over him. The flowers he held in his hands symbolized more than just a gesture; they were a tribute to a person whose life had been shaped, even if only briefly, by the power of Michael's influence. In that moment, Michael understood the gravity of his position in the world. It wasn't about winning championships, breaking records, or signing endorsement deals. It was about moments like this, moments when the greatness of an athlete wasn't measured in accolades, but in the quiet, powerful impact they had on the lives of others. As he stood there, silent and still, Michael thought of all the fans who had supported him throughout his career. Sarah's letter had been just one example, but it was a reminder of the countless others who had written to him, who had sent him messages of support, or who had simply believed in him. It was humbling, and it made him realize that, perhaps more than anything, his legacy was not just defined by the victories on the court, but by the way he had inspired those who looked up to him. Leaving the flowers behind, Michael stood for a moment longer, taking in the quiet surroundings of the cemetery. There was a sense of peace in the air, a feeling that, for just a brief time, the world had stopped. It was a humbling experience for Michael, one that brought him closer to the people who had made his career possible, the fans who had supported him, cheered for him, and believed in him even when the odds seemed impossible. In a way, it was a moment of closure, not just for Sarah's family, but for Michael himself. He had come to honor a fan, but in doing so, he had honored a part of himself as well, the part of him that still remembered the power of a child's dreams and the bond between a hero and a fan. As he left the cemetery, Michael reflected on the meaning of the visit. It wasn't just about fulfilling a dream for Sarah, it was about understanding the profound impact of his life's work. The story of Sarah's letter would live on, not as another chapter in the history of Michael Jordan's career, but as a testament to the timeless connection between athletes and the people who hold them in such high regard. And for Michael, that was a legacy worth cherishing. The visit to Sarah's grave had deeply moved Michael Jordan, more than he had anticipated. It was a personal moment, one that didn't belong in the media or the spotlight. The emotions he had felt were raw and unspoken: his gratitude for the fans who had supported him throughout his career, his understanding of how he had become a role model, and how his influence had extended far beyond the basketball court. What had started as a simple, heartfelt letter from a child had turned into a profound reminder of the connection between him and his supporters. After the visit, Michael had returned to his life, but something about the experience lingered. He had always known the weight of his legacy, but this act of kindness, of honoring a fan who had passed away, reminded him of the true responsibility that came with his status. It wasn't about the accolades, the fame, or the wealth, it was about the lives he had touched along the way. Sarah's letter, lost and forgotten in time, had sparked something much deeper in Michael, a realization that the true power of his fame wasn't in his achievements, but in the ways he could inspire others. Sarah's family, too, was profoundly affected by Michael's visit. They had never expected such a personal gesture. They had simply wanted to share Sarah's letter with him, to let him know how much she had admired him. To see Michael Jordan stand in front of Sarah's grave, in silence, was something beyond their wildest dreams. It wasn't just about a celebrity acknowledging their loved one, it was about a shared moment of connection that transcended time and death. It was the recognition of Sarah's life, her hopes, and her dreams. Word of Michael's visit slowly began to spread, but it wasn't the kind of story the media jumped on immediately. This wasn't a typical celebrity stunt or a publicity move. There were no grand gestures or dramatic reveals. It was simply Michael Jordan, honoring a fan in the most human way possible. The few who knew about the visit understood the significance, but Michael wasn't one to make a spectacle out of personal moments. As news of his gesture spread through the small town, many people were deeply moved. Michael Jordan had always been more than just a basketball player to his fans. He was an icon, a figure who represented the power of perseverance, the strength of belief, and the idea that anyone could overcome their circumstances and achieve greatness. But for those who had admired him from afar, the visit to Sarah's grave revealed something even more profound. Michael was, at his core, just like anyone else. He, too, had been touched by the sincerity of a young fan's dream. He, too, had felt the weight of those who looked up to him, not just for his talents but for the values he represented. For Sarah's family, the visit brought a sense of peace. They had always known that Sarah's connection to Michael Jordan had been important to her, but they hadn't realized the depth of that connection. The letter she had written all those years ago was more than just an expression of admiration, it was a symbol of hope. A child's hope that anything was possible. A dream that one day, her idol would hear her words. That dream had not only been fulfilled in the letter but had been brought full circle with Michael's personal tribute. It was in this moment that Michael realized how powerful such small acts of kindness could be. He had always been dedicated to his career, focused on winning championships, breaking records, and solidifying his place in history. But this visit wasn't about winning or legacy, it was about something much more intimate and meaningful. It was about taking the time to honor a young fan who had believed in him when he was just a player on the court, someone who had never expected anything in return but had given him the greatest gift, faith. As Michael reflected on this, he began to think about his own relationship with his fans. Throughout his career, he had been surrounded by millions of people who saw him as more than just a player. He had become a symbol of excellence, a figure who represented the culmination of hard work, dedication, and triumph. But he had never truly considered the deep, personal connection that fans felt toward him. It wasn't about the Air Jordans, the commercials, or the highlight reels. It was about something deeper, something that transcended fame and success. In many ways, the moment with Sarah's letter had given Michael a deeper understanding of what it meant to be a role model. He had always approached his career with a sense of responsibility. He had never taken his position for granted, always striving to be the best in everything he did. But this visit, this personal tribute to a fan who had passed away, brought him face to face with the true essence of why he mattered to so many people. It wasn't just about winning, it was about the emotional connection he had forged with millions of fans over the years. For Sarah's family, Michael's visit also reinforced the power of memories. Sarah had passed away young, but her love for Michael Jordan had never waned. Her passion for basketball, her belief in the impossible, had been rooted in the way she admired him, not just as a player but as a symbol of hope. Sarah's family saw that her dream, her hope to one day meet Michael, had come full circle in the most unexpected of ways. They had always remembered her enthusiasm for Michael Jordan, her childhood posters and letters, but seeing that dream recognized in such a heartfelt way gave them a sense of closure. As Michael left the cemetery, he couldn't shake the feeling that this moment had been a turning point for him. It wasn't just about paying respects to a fan, it was about understanding the magnitude of the connection he had built with people over the years. He had always known the responsibility that came with his fame, but this visit brought him closer to the reality of what it meant. It wasn't about the titles, the rings, or the records. It was about the quiet moments of connection that he had with his fans, the way their lives had been touched by his work. The visit also sparked a greater sense of humility in Michael. In a world where athletes were often deified or criticized for their public personas, he began to understand that there was more to his legacy than just his career. His influence reached far beyond the basketball court, and it was his kindness, his humility, and his recognition of the fans who had supported him that would ultimately define his legacy. It wasn't the highlights on the court, the slam dunks, or the clutch shots. It was the quieter, more personal moments like this one that showed the true impact he had on the world. As he left the cemetery and the small town behind, Michael felt a deep sense of gratitude. He had been given a platform to inspire, to motivate, and to change lives. And in that moment, he understood that, even in the simplest gestures, he could make an impact. It wasn't about how loud the applause was, or how many trophies he had amassed. It was about moments like this, moments when he could quietly acknowledge the impact he had on someone's life, and in doing so, make their legacy part of his own. The impact of Michael Jordan's visit to Sarah's grave reverberated far beyond the small-town cemetery where the gesture had taken place. What seemed like a deeply personal, quiet moment between a hero and a fan grew into a story that touched hearts across the country. The story was simple: a fan who had written to Michael as a child, expressing admiration and hope, and a superstar who, years later, honored her memory by visiting her grave. There was no fanfare, no press conference, and no cameras. Just Michael Jordan, standing in silence, leaving flowers at a grave, an act that seemed so simple, yet spoke volumes about the true nature of his legacy. As word of the visit spread, it began to capture the imagination of the public. Michael Jordan was known for his competitiveness, his dominance on the court, and his larger-than-life persona. But this was a different side of him, one that the public rarely saw. It was a side of humility, of recognizing the emotional bond that forms between a fan and the athlete they admire. Michael had spent his entire career building a reputation as the greatest of all time, a title that carried immense pressure and expectations. But this visit, this quiet act of respect, was a reminder that even the greatest athletes had a responsibility to recognize the human side of their influence. For the people in Sarah's hometown, the visit was something that could not be put into words. They had always known Sarah as a passionate fan of Michael Jordan, but seeing the bond she shared with him become a part of her legacy was a moment of profound meaning. Michael's decision to visit, to honor her memory in such a personal way, solidified Sarah's place in the community's heart. She wasn't just a fan who had passed away, she was a part of something much bigger, a story that connected her to a man who had inspired generations of people around the world. The visit also resonated deeply with Michael himself. In the days following the visit, he found himself reflecting on the meaning of what he had done. He had spent his career focused on basketball, on winning championships, and on achieving greatness. But the visit to Sarah's grave reminded him of something more fundamental, something that had always been at the core of who he was. It was the connection between an athlete and the fans who supported them, the understanding that the impact of a superstar went beyond the court and into the lives of the people who admired them. It wasn't lost on Michael that Sarah had written to him as a child, never expecting a response. She had simply poured out her admiration and gratitude, hoping that her words would somehow reach him. And yet, years later, that letter resurfaced, sparking a moment of connection between Michael and a young fan who had never imagined that her words would be read by the very person she looked up to. It was a humbling experience for Michael, one that made him appreciate even more the influence he had on people's lives. It wasn't just the wins or the trophies that defined his legacy, it was the way he had inspired millions of people to believe in something greater than themselves. As the story of his visit spread, it started to resonate with people across the country. Fans from all walks of life shared their own stories of how Michael Jordan had influenced them, how his success had motivated them to overcome their own challenges and pursue their dreams. For many, Michael was more than just a basketball player. He was a symbol of possibility, of what could be achieved through hard work, perseverance, and belief. But this visit, this quiet tribute to a fan who had passed away, reminded people that Michael was also a man who understood the power of kindness, humility, and respect. The media, which had often focused on Michael's competitiveness and his fierce drive to be the best, took notice of the story as well. The headlines, however, were different this time. They didn't focus on his achievements or his records. Instead, they told the story of a man who had taken the time to honor a young fan's memory, to show respect for someone who had been touched by his legacy. It was a side of Michael Jordan that many had never seen, but it was a side that, for those who knew him well, was always there, quiet, humble, and deeply caring. For Sarah's family, the visit was more than they could have ever hoped for. They had never expected Michael Jordan to acknowledge Sarah's letter, let alone visit her grave. It was a dream that Sarah had carried with her through her life, a dream of connecting with the man who had been her hero. And though Sarah was no longer there to witness it, her family found solace in knowing that her wish had been fulfilled in the most meaningful way. Michael's visit wasn't just a gesture, it was a testament to the impact of Sarah's admiration for him, and to the idea that dreams, no matter how small or simple, have a way of coming full circle. In the wake of the visit, Sarah's family felt a deep sense of gratitude. They had always known how much Michael Jordan had meant to Sarah, but to see him acknowledge her memory in such a personal way was something that went beyond words. It wasn't just the flowers or the silence that moved them, it was the understanding that Michael had taken the time to honor Sarah in a way that no one else could. The visit was an affirmation that the connection between athlete and fan was real, that the admiration Sarah had felt for Michael had transcended time and circumstance, and that her memory would live on in a way that was meaningful. For Michael, the visit to Sarah's grave was also a turning point. He had always understood the responsibility that came with fame, but this was a reminder that the true impact of his life wasn't just in the championships he had won or the records he had set. It was in the way he had touched the lives of millions of people, how his influence had inspired generations to believe in themselves, and how he had become more than just a basketball player. Michael Jordan was a symbol of what was possible, but he was also a reminder that even the greatest among us can make a difference in ways that go beyond the spotlight. The visit, and the story that followed, left a lasting impression on everyone involved. Sarah's family, the town, and the world of Michael Jordan's fans saw him in a new light, not as a distant celebrity, but as a man who understood the power of connection, the importance of humility, and the impact that small acts of kindness can have on a person's legacy. Michael had spent his career building a reputation for excellence, but it was moments like this, moments when he chose to honor the memory of a fan who had admired him, that truly defined who he was as a person. As Michael left the cemetery that day, he felt a deep sense of peace. He had paid tribute to a fan, but in doing so, he had reminded himself of the power of his own influence. It wasn't the victories or the records that mattered most, it was the lives he had touched along the way, and the legacy he had created not just as an athlete, but as a human being who had made a difference in the world. Sarah's letter, her simple wish, had become a testament to the idea that even the smallest gestures can have a lasting impact. And in the end, that was the true measure of Michael Jordan's greatness. In the days following Michael Jordan's visit to Sarah's grave, the impact of his gesture continued to resonate far beyond the small town where it had occurred. The story, which had begun as a quiet, personal moment, began to take on a life of its own. The media picked up the story, not as an endorsement of Michael's brand or legacy, but as an example of his humanity, a side of him rarely seen in the public eye. People began to talk about it, sharing the story across social media, and it became a symbol of the profound connection that can exist between a celebrity and their fans. For Michael, the attention was both humbling and unexpected. He had never been one to seek recognition for his actions, especially when it came to personal moments like this. His career had been built on his determination to be the best, on his focus, and his drive to win. But in the years after his retirement, Michael had begun to reflect more on the lasting impact of his career, the way in which his success had influenced not only the world of basketball but also the lives of those who had supported him. The visit to Sarah's grave had reminded him of the power of his influence, not in the wins or the endorsements, but in the way he had inspired generations of people to believe in their dreams. Sarah's family, too, felt the power of the story. The recognition they had received from Michael Jordan, even after Sarah had passed, was something they would carry with them for the rest of their lives. It wasn't just the flowers left at her grave or the visit that meant so much, it was the acknowledgement of Sarah's life and the legacy of her dreams. They had known how much Michael had meant to Sarah, how she had idolized him, and now, through this simple, yet deeply meaningful gesture, they felt that her admiration for him had been validated in a way they could never have imagined. As the story continued to spread, many people found themselves reflecting on their own connections with their heroes, both in sports and in other areas of life. Sarah's letter had been an innocent expression of admiration, but it had taken on greater significance after her death. The letter, written by a young girl who had never expected a response, became a symbol of hope, hope that one's voice could be heard, that dreams could be realized, and that the people we admire might one day recognize the impact they have had on us. It wasn't just basketball fans who were moved by the story. People from all walks of life found themselves relating to the idea of a dream coming full circle, of a hero acknowledging their most devoted admirers, even in ways that weren't expected. Michael's visit, though not grand or attention-seeking, became a story of deep emotional significance. It wasn't about a basketball player acknowledging a fan, it was about showing that the admiration, the dreams, and the beliefs we carry with us can shape our lives in ways we may never fully realize. Michael Jordan's visit to Sarah's grave was proof that there are moments when the dream of connecting with someone we admire can transcend the boundaries of reality. For Michael, the outpouring of support and gratitude for his visit was both heartwarming and overwhelming. He had always known the power of his influence, but this experience reminded him of how deeply those connections ran. He thought back to the early years of his career, when he had been just a young, hungry player trying to prove himself in the league. He remembered how important the support of his fans had been to him, how they had believed in him long before he had won his first championship or become the household name he was. Michael had never taken that support for granted, but as he reflected on the meaning of Sarah's letter, he realized just how much of an impact the simple act of recognition could have. In the wake of the visit, Michael also received messages from other fans who shared their own stories of how he had inspired them throughout their lives. It wasn't just about being the best basketball player, it was about being a source of motivation, a symbol of perseverance, and an example of what could be achieved through hard work and belief in oneself. The messages from these fans mirrored Sarah's own letter. They spoke of dreams fulfilled, of challenges overcome, and of lives changed simply by following his example. Michael had always known that his career would leave a legacy, but the visit to Sarah's grave made him realize that his influence had gone far beyond what he had ever imagined. The story also prompted a wave of reflection on the nature of fandom itself. People began to consider what it meant to be a fan, not just as someone who admired a celebrity from a distance, but as someone whose life had been influenced by the actions, words, and successes of that individual. It became clear that fans weren't just passive observers of greatness, they were active participants in the story of an athlete's career. They were the ones who cheered, who wrote letters, who bought tickets, who wore jerseys, and who believed in the impossible. Michael had always known that his fans were the reason for his success, but he had never fully grasped the depth of their devotion until this experience made him realize just how far-reaching that connection could be. The visit also sparked a broader conversation about the role of celebrities and athletes in the lives of their fans. In a world that often elevates celebrities to an unattainable status, it was refreshing to see a figure like Michael Jordan acknowledge the humanity of the people who supported him. The story of his visit to Sarah's grave was a reminder that even those who seem untouchable are still connected to the world of everyday people, and that the smallest acts of kindness, of acknowledgement, can make a lasting impact. Michael Jordan, in a moment of quiet reflection, had reminded the world that the influence of a hero isn't just measured by the size of their accomplishments, but by the way they choose to interact with the lives of those they inspire. As the months went by, Sarah's family continued to be grateful for Michael's visit. They never imagined that the letter she had written so many years ago would lead to such a profound and meaningful gesture. Michael had honored Sarah's memory in a way they could never have hoped for, and in doing so, he had given them a sense of peace. They knew that her dream of connecting with her idol had been realized, not just in a letter, but in a moment that would live on in their hearts forever. For Michael, the visit to Sarah's grave was a turning point in his understanding of his own legacy. It wasn't just about the records or the fame, it was about the impact he had on the people who believed in him. As he continued to reflect on that moment, he felt a renewed sense of purpose, not just as an athlete, but as a person. The quiet tribute to a fan who had passed away had reminded him of the profound power of connection, the impact that one person's belief could have on another, and the importance of recognizing the humanity in the people who support us. In the end, Michael Jordan's legacy would always be defined by his greatness on the court, but it was moments like this, small acts of kindness and reflection, that would define him as a person. And as the world remembered Sarah's story, they were reminded that even the smallest gestures could change lives, and that the true measure of greatness lies not in what we accomplish for ourselves, but in the difference we make in the lives of others. In the weeks that followed Michael Jordan's quiet visit to Sarah's grave, something remarkable began to unfold. The story, initially a private and personal moment, had now captured the attention of many. The outpouring of support and admiration from fans around the world underscored the deep connection between athletes and their followers. But what stood out most was the way the story had shifted the conversation about celebrity influence. For a long time, athletes were often seen as distant figures, their actions scrutinized under a magnifying glass, but Michael's gesture had painted a more human picture of what it meant to be an icon. His visit wasn't about self-promotion or branding. It was a simple, thoughtful act that transcended the ordinary expectations placed on someone of his stature. The attention surrounding the visit didn't come from the usual angles. This wasn't about a new endorsement deal, a movie, or a product launch. It was about a meaningful, deeply human moment. Michael's decision to honor Sarah's memory in such a personal way had inspired people from all walks of life to reflect on their own relationships with the figures they admired. The public wasn't just talking about Michael Jordan, the basketball player. They were talking about Michael Jordan, the man who took the time to pay tribute to a fan who had been a part of his journey, even without ever meeting him. It was a side of Michael Jordan that few had seen and even fewer understood. For Sarah's family, the visit had brought closure in ways they hadn't expected. Sarah had always spoken fondly of Michael, and her letter to him, which had been tucked away for years, had represented a moment in her life when she had dared to dream. It wasn't just about meeting Michael Jordan, it was about the belief that dreams, no matter how big or small, were worth pursuing. Her family had always known that Sarah had admired Michael, but they hadn't truly understood the depth of that admiration until they saw Michael himself pay tribute to her memory. The visit had completed the circle. Sarah's dream, in some small but profound way, had come true. The emotional weight of the story hadn't gone unnoticed by Michael. He had always understood the responsibility that came with his status, but this moment had deepened his appreciation for the connection he had built with his fans. Throughout his career, he had always been aware that his performance on the court mattered to millions of people. But what the visit had shown him was that his impact went far beyond his athletic achievements. It was about the way his fans saw him as a symbol of hope, possibility, and perseverance. As the months passed, Michael took time to reflect on his legacy. His career had already been filled with incredible accomplishments, from championships to individual awards to the global reach of his brand. But this experience had shown him that true greatness wasn't just about individual success. It was about the way you affected the lives of those who supported you, those who believed in you even when you couldn't see them. The visit to Sarah's grave wasn't just about acknowledging a fan, it was a reminder that sometimes, the most important connections are the ones that are not visible to the world. The emotional depth of the visit also had an impact on how Michael viewed the next steps in his life. Retirement had given him space to explore different avenues, from business ventures to philanthropy, but this experience made him realize that there was still a lot of power in personal connections. Michael wasn't sure how he would move forward in terms of engaging with his fans, but he knew this moment had shifted something in him. He began to consider how he could do more, not just in terms of financial contributions to charities or organizations, but in terms of connecting with people on a deeper, more personal level. His visit to Sarah's grave had illuminated an aspect of his own life that he hadn't fully appreciated until now, the ability to use his platform for more than just visibility, but for meaningful, lasting impact. While the public focused on Michael's visit as a singular, powerful moment, there was a growing movement within his circle to create more opportunities for him to connect with fans in similar ways. Michael had always been private, keeping his personal life away from the public eye, but he now realized that there was room for him to share his humanity without sacrificing his boundaries. Sarah's family had shown him the power of a single act of recognition. They had lived with Sarah's memory for years, and they knew that this small, thoughtful gesture from Michael Jordan had meant more than words could express. For them, it was a reminder that no gesture is too small to make a lasting difference. As time went on, more fans came forward with their own stories, sharing letters they had written to Michael, recounting moments when they had been inspired by his career, or even just how his presence had shaped their lives. Some of these fans had written to him as children, others had watched his games in their living rooms, and some had grown up idolizing him as the embodiment of greatness. For Michael, it became clear that his role in their lives had been something they carried with them, just as he had carried their support with him throughout his career. He had been part of their journey, even if he hadn't known it at the time. But not all of the stories were about glory or achievement. Some fans shared their stories of struggles, of how Michael's resilience had helped them through tough times. These weren't just stories of people rooting for the man on the court, they were stories of people who had taken Michael's example and applied it to their own lives. In that way, Michael's influence had transcended the world of basketball, it had become part of the fabric of their everyday existence. His visit to Sarah's grave had become a symbol of that larger, more profound impact. It was a reminder that greatness wasn't just in victories, it was in the way you lived your life, how you treated others, and how your actions rippled through the world, sometimes in ways you could never fully comprehend. The visit to Sarah's grave had come full circle. What had started as a small, personal tribute had sparked a larger conversation about the power of influence and the responsibility that comes with it. Michael Jordan's legacy was already defined by his achievements on the court, but the visit had given him something deeper to reflect on, how his actions, his words, and his decisions affected people in ways that went beyond the basketball game. It was a reminder that even the smallest gestures could create powerful, lasting connections. For Sarah's family, the memory of Michael's visit remained a source of comfort. They knew that Sarah's story had been shared with the world, that her admiration for Michael had been recognized in the most meaningful way possible. Sarah's dream had been to one day connect with the man who had inspired her. In the end, she had done so much more than that. She had left behind a legacy that would not only live on in the hearts of her family but would continue to inspire others to believe that even the smallest hopes and dreams could come to fruition. And in that way, Sarah Thompson had become part of Michael Jordan's own story, a story that transcended basketball and lived on in the lives of the people who had been touched by his greatness. As Michael Jordan reflected more on his visit to Sarah's grave, the significance of the gesture began to crystallize in ways that went beyond his initial understanding. He had always been acutely aware of his role in the world, knowing that his career had impacted millions of lives, yet this experience, this simple act of recognizing a fan's devotion, had given him a new perspective on his legacy. The visit to Sarah's resting place had brought into sharp focus just how deeply his career had resonated, not just with sports enthusiasts, but with individuals from all walks of life who had used his story as inspiration for their own battles and triumphs. He was no longer merely a basketball player. In that moment, he had become a symbol of resilience, not just to those who admired his skills but to those who admired his humanity. Michael had spent much of his life dedicated to achieving excellence, often pushing himself and those around him to achieve the unattainable. But it wasn't just his skill on the court that defined him, it was his ability to inspire belief in others. Whether it was through his iconic moments in the NBA Finals or his relentless pursuit of perfection, Michael had become more than just an athlete. He was a touchstone for determination, hard work, and the unshakable belief that anything was possible if you put in the effort. Yet, standing in front of Sarah's grave, he felt a deeper, quieter truth. It wasn't his basketball accomplishments that had truly impacted Sarah, it was his spirit, the way he carried himself through challenges, the way he turned every defeat into an opportunity. Sarah had admired him not just as a player, but as someone who showed that perseverance mattered more than talent. That understanding changed Michael in a way that would resonate with him in the years to come. In the wake of his visit, a story that had been shared among close friends and family began to spread to a wider audience. Those who had heard about Michael's visit shared their own memories of how his career had influenced them. These weren't just the expected stories from die-hard basketball fans, they were from everyday people who had been quietly impacted by his presence in their lives. A teacher who had used Michael's story of overcoming adversity to motivate her students. A man who, after losing a job, found inspiration in Michael's work ethic to start his own business. Fans who had followed Michael since his early years in the league shared their own personal moments of how watching him play had helped them face their own life challenges. It was clear that Michael's influence stretched far beyond the world of sports. People had adopted his mindset, his competitive spirit, and his relentless drive to overcome obstacles. But it wasn't just about idolizing him as an athlete, it was about the values he represented, the dedication to something larger than oneself. His fans were not just watching a game, they were learning how to approach life with the same determination and resilience that he had shown. And that was the true power of Michael Jordan's legacy. He had been more than a basketball player. He had been a teacher, an example, and an inspiration. Michael hadn't realized the depth of this influence until after the visit. In his mind, he was just a player who loved the game. He was doing what he had always done, playing basketball, excelling, winning. But as he read the stories that came pouring in from fans who had been touched by his life, it became clear to him that his legacy was woven into their lives as much as it was in his own. For some, Michael was a hero. For others, he was a symbol of hope, a reflection of the power of perseverance, and a reminder that no matter how difficult life may seem, there is always a way forward. The stories of Sarah's family, the townspeople, and the fans who reached out to Michael all blended together, creating a deeper, more nuanced understanding of the role he had played in their lives. He had been a constant presence in their thoughts, not just as a player but as a source of belief in their own potential. Michael began to realize that his greatness wasn't just measured by the accolades, the championships, or the endorsements. It was measured by how many people he had touched, how many people had found strength in his journey. In this way, his influence wasn't just about what he had done, it was about the way he had made people feel, the belief he had instilled in them that they, too, could achieve greatness in their own way. Sarah's family, of course, had been the first to see the full significance of Michael's visit. They had always known how much Sarah had admired Michael. The letters she had written as a child had been a cherished memory, a testament to her belief in him. But it wasn't until Michael's visit that they truly understood the depth of her connection to him. The visit wasn't just about a celebrity acknowledging a fan's admiration, it was a recognition of the dream she had carried with her for so long, and the way that dream had shaped her. Sarah had never expected to meet Michael, and yet, in a quiet, profound way, she had. Through Michael's visit, her dream had been fulfilled. For the community, Michael's tribute served as a reminder of the power of belief. The town, which had always been proud of Sarah's spirit, saw that pride reflected in Michael's visit. It wasn't just about a fan meeting their idol, it was about honoring the dreams of a small-town girl who had believed in the impossible. Michael had touched their lives, not as a basketball player, but as a man who had recognized the power of dreams. In the process, he had reminded the community that their stories were valuable, that their dreams, no matter how small, deserved to be heard and respected. The visit also had an impact on Michael himself. He began to consider the way he had interacted with the public throughout his career. There had always been a wall between him and his fans, an invisible barrier that kept his personal life and his professional life separate. But as he reflected on Sarah's letter and the profound effect it had had on his understanding of legacy, he realized that the barrier he had erected had kept him from fully appreciating the depth of the relationship he had with his fans. This realization opened up new possibilities for Michael. He wasn't sure what shape it would take, but he knew that he wanted to engage with his fans in ways that felt more personal and meaningful. It wasn't about taking center stage or putting on a performance. It was about acknowledging the connection he had with people in ways that felt authentic. As he considered the stories people had shared, he realized that his influence was never just about being the best basketball player. It was about being someone who, through his actions and attitude, had made people believe they could be better versions of themselves. In the end, Sarah's letter was far more than just a simple message to a basketball player. It was a testament to the enduring power of belief, the ways in which our dreams can shape our lives, and the impact one individual can have on the hearts of others. Michael's visit had closed the circle, honoring a fan's dream in a way that surpassed anyone's expectations. What had begun as a letter written in childhood had become a story that would live on in both Sarah's family and the many people who had been touched by Michael Jordan's legacy. And in that, Michael Jordan had learned that sometimes the most profound moments of connection come not in the spotlight, but in the quiet, unsung gestures that leave a lasting impression on those who are lucky enough to witness them. As the story of Michael Jordan's visit to Sarah's grave continued to unfold, it became clear that the power of the gesture went far beyond what anyone had initially expected. What had started as a small, intimate moment, a tribute to a fan who had admired him from a distance, had blossomed into a symbol of the profound influence athletes can have on their fans, even after their careers are over. The visit had stirred emotions not just within Sarah's family, but in people around the world. Michael's decision to honor a fan's memory had shown the world something rare, a true, heartfelt connection between a legendary figure and the people who supported him from the very beginning. It wasn't about the grand gestures of fame, the championships, or the iconic moments on the court. It was about the quiet acts of kindness that resonate far beyond any performance or record. For Michael, the aftermath of the visit brought clarity. He had always understood the importance of his role as a public figure, but it wasn't until this moment that he truly grasped the weight of the emotional connection that fans like Sarah had with him. He had been their inspiration, their symbol of hope. To them, he wasn't just an athlete, he was a representation of overcoming adversity and achieving greatness. Sarah's letter, her hope that Michael might someday read her words, was more than just a fan's admiration. It was the kind of unspoken bond that existed between an idol and someone who saw in them the strength to push through life's struggles. The attention that followed Michael's visit wasn't the result of media manipulation or a calculated move to gain publicity. It wasn't about using the moment to sell a product or promote an image. Instead, it was a story that was shared because of its authenticity, the deep humanity at its core. Sarah's letter, discovered years after her passing, had come to represent the enduring connection between a fan and an athlete. Her belief in Michael Jordan had never been about the status of his career or his ability to win titles. It had been about what he symbolized: dedication, perseverance, and the power of believing in oneself. These were the values that had drawn Sarah to him, and ultimately, they had brought Michael to her grave to pay his respects. Michael's decision to take time out of his life to visit Sarah's grave also shifted the way he saw his place in the world. He had been so focused on the competitive aspect of his career, on being the best, on winning, on achieving perfection, that he had never really stopped to consider the deeper impact of his success. Yes, he had been admired by millions, but it wasn't until after his visit to Sarah's grave that he truly understood the kind of impact his actions had on people's lives. The championship wins and the accolades were all part of his legacy, but it was moments like this one that truly defined the way people viewed him, not just as a basketball player, but as a man. After the visit, Michael began to receive letters and messages from fans who shared their own stories of how he had inspired them, how his career had served as a model for their own struggles. Some of these messages came from people who had followed his career since its early days, others from those who had found hope in his achievements much later. But the common thread through all of them was the sense of admiration and gratitude people felt for the example he had set. It wasn't just about basketball, it was about resilience, determination, and the belief that, no matter what the odds, you could always push forward. Michael had always been a private person, and he had never been one to wear his emotions on his sleeve. He had spent most of his life focused on his career, his family, and the things that mattered most to him. But this experience, this simple act of honoring Sarah, had opened a new chapter in his understanding of himself and his role in the world. For the first time, he realized that his legacy wasn't just about his own personal achievements. It was about the lives he had touched, the people who had drawn strength from his story, and the ways in which his career had inspired others to chase their own dreams. For Sarah's family, the visit had provided a sense of closure they hadn't known they needed. They had always known how much Sarah admired Michael, but to see him pay tribute to her memory in such a meaningful way was a gift beyond words. They saw the way Michael's visit had affected the entire community, and they realized that Sarah's life, though short, had made an impact far greater than they could have ever imagined. In some ways, Sarah's dream of connecting with Michael had been fulfilled in a way that transcended the simple fan-to-celebrity relationship. She had become a part of his legacy, her memory forever tied to the man she had admired from afar. The visit also sparked a broader conversation about the nature of fame and the responsibility that comes with it. People began to reflect on the role of athletes and public figures in shaping the lives of others. Too often, the conversation around celebrity focuses on the negative, the scandals, the controversies, the pressures of fame. But Michael's visit had shown the world that there was another side to the story, the side that wasn't about media attention or self-promotion, but about the genuine connections that could be formed between an athlete and their fans. It reminded people that fame, when used thoughtfully, could serve as a powerful tool for good. In the months after the visit, Michael began to think more about how he could continue to connect with people on a deeper level. He had always been active in philanthropy, but the experience had inspired him to take a more personal approach to giving back. He started visiting schools, attending community events, and meeting with young athletes who looked up to him. He wanted to create opportunities for them to share their dreams, just as Sarah had shared hers with him. He realized that his true legacy wasn't in the records he had set or the trophies he had won. It was in the lives he had touched and the ways in which he had inspired people to believe in themselves. The connection between Michael and Sarah, though brief, had transcended the boundaries of time. The letter Sarah had written all those years ago, the one she had never expected a response to, had now become a symbol of hope and belief. It had sparked a chain of events that had changed Michael's perspective on his own legacy. It had reminded him that sometimes the greatest acts of kindness come not in grand gestures, but in quiet moments that touch the hearts of others. Michael's visit to Sarah's grave had been one such moment, and it would stay with him forever, just as it stayed with Sarah's family and the countless fans who were inspired by the story of a young girl's admiration for a basketball legend. In the end, the story of Michael Jordan and Sarah Thompson was not just about an athlete visiting the grave of a fan, it was about the power of connection. The way we all influence each other's lives in ways we may never fully understand. Michael had been Sarah's hero, and in turn, he had become a hero to millions. But in that quiet cemetery, he had learned something deeper, that his legacy wasn't just built on the things he had accomplished, but on the way he had inspired others to dream bigger, to reach higher, and to believe in themselves, just as Sarah had believed in him all those years ago. The story of Michael Jordan's visit to Sarah's grave continued to unfold, touching the lives of countless people in ways no one could have predicted. In the months following the visit, the initial wave of media attention began to die down, but the impact of Michael's gesture lingered. For many, the visit had been a reminder of the human side of athletes, the part of them that often gets lost in the glare of the spotlight. Michael Jordan had always been known for his competitiveness, his unrelenting drive to win, and his larger-than-life presence. But this visit, so personal and unassuming, showed a different side of the basketball legend, a side that resonated deeply with people across the world. Sarah Thompson's family continued to reflect on the significance of the moment. They had never expected a response to Sarah's letter, let alone a visit from Michael himself. For them, the gesture went far beyond the act of honoring a fan's memory. It was a moment of connection that bridged the gap between an idol and an admirer, a bridge that transcended both time and space. They had always known how much Sarah admired Michael, but they hadn't realized just how profound that connection was. The visit had validated Sarah's dreams, and it had shown her family the lasting impact of her admiration. It was a gift they would carry with them for the rest of their lives. As the story gained traction, it became more than just a news item. It became a symbol of the power of dreams and the importance of taking the time to honor those who have supported you along the way. Sarah's letter, written when she was a child, had never expected a response, but in the end, it had sparked a chain of events that connected her with Michael Jordan in a way that no one could have anticipated. The letter was no longer just a memento of Sarah's childhood, it had become a testament to the belief that anything was possible if you held on to your dreams. For Michael, the experience had caused him to reflect deeply on the legacy he had built over the years. His career had been defined by titles, accolades, and record-breaking moments, but it wasn't until the visit to Sarah's grave that he fully understood the scope of his influence. He had always been aware of his role as a public figure, but this was different. The visit had shown him that his legacy wasn't just about what he had accomplished on the basketball court. It was about the way he had inspired people, the way he had given them the strength to pursue their own dreams. It was about the lives he had touched, not just the championships he had won. Michael's thoughts continued to evolve as he processed the impact of his visit. He had always been driven by the desire to be the best, to outwork his competition, and to achieve greatness. But now, he was beginning to see that true greatness wasn't always about winning. It was about the ability to inspire, to touch lives in ways that extended far beyond the boundaries of sport. Sarah's letter had been an expression of admiration from a young girl, but in the end, it had become something far more meaningful, a symbol of how one person's belief could transcend time and space and create a lasting connection. The impact of the visit wasn't just felt by Sarah's family or the fans who had followed Michael's career, it also resonated within Michael's own circle. Those closest to him were struck by the way the visit had affected him. They had always known that Michael had a deep sense of responsibility toward his fans, but seeing the emotional weight of the visit unfold made them realize just how much the connection between athlete and fan meant to him. Michael had always been a perfectionist, someone who pushed himself and others to achieve greatness. But in that moment, at Sarah's grave, he had shown a level of humility and emotional depth that few had seen before. As the story continued to circulate, more people came forward with their own stories of how Michael had inspired them. Some were childhood fans who had watched him play for years, while others were individuals who had never seen him on the court but had been touched by his legacy in other ways. For some, Michael had been a role model in their youth, a figure who had given them hope when they needed it most. For others, he had been a beacon of resilience, someone who showed them that success wasn't just about natural talent but about hard work and dedication. One of the most striking aspects of the stories that emerged was the common thread of admiration not just for Michael's athleticism, but for his character. People spoke of how Michael's competitiveness had inspired them, but it was his humility and his willingness to acknowledge others that stood out most. Michael had spent years in the public eye, often under intense scrutiny, but the visit to Sarah's grave had revealed a side of him that many had never seen, a side that valued human connection above all else. As he read the stories from fans who shared their experiences, Michael began to realize that the visit had created a ripple effect that was much larger than he had initially imagined. Sarah's story had touched people in ways that went far beyond her admiration for him as a basketball player. It had sparked a larger conversation about the importance of dreams, of believing in oneself, and of honoring the people who make those dreams possible. Michael had become more than just an athlete, he had become a symbol of perseverance, of overcoming obstacles, and of the power of believing in something greater than yourself. The outpouring of support was humbling for Michael. He had spent much of his life focused on personal achievement, on competing at the highest level and pushing himself to be the best. But this experience had made him realize that true success wasn't just about what you accomplished, it was about the lives you touched along the way. Michael Jordan had been a part of Sarah's journey, and in return, she had become a part of his. The connection between them, though brief, had shown him the true meaning of legacy. It wasn't about the trophies, the endorsement deals, or the accolades. It was about the lives you impacted, the way you inspired others to chase their dreams, and the lasting impression you left on the hearts of those who believed in you. The visit to Sarah's grave had left an indelible mark on Michael, one that would stay with him for the rest of his life. It had reminded him of the importance of connection, of the need to acknowledge the people who had supported him, and of the power of dreams. Sarah had written her letter to him as a child, never expecting a response, but in the end, her words had become a symbol of something far greater than herself. And in that moment, Michael had come to understand that sometimes, the most powerful connections are the ones that transcend time, distance, and even death. As he continued to reflect on the significance of the visit, Michael began to think about how he could use his platform in a more meaningful way moving forward. He had always been active in his charitable work, but he now understood that the true impact of his legacy was not in what he gave, but in the way he had touched the lives of those who believed in him. The visit to Sarah's grave had been a reminder that the real measure of success was not in personal achievements, but in the difference you made in the lives of others. And for Michael, that was the most lasting legacy he could ever leave.